when you're down and out, things just don't work out, and it seems that your life is at an end. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear. Grace my fears relieve. How precious is that grace appeared the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and sorrows, I have already come. 'Twas grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 bright shining guys, the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise. And when we first begun, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Was blind, but now I see.
The book of the Revelation, chapter 12. Here John covers in 6 verses, he'll cover all from the expulsion of Satan out of heaven, clear on through to the end of the last of the tribulation period. He walks you through in a very swift manner, and it really unlocks some things. So chapter 12 is a very, very, very important chapter. I want everyone to pay very close attention as we go through here. Again, let me remind you that we're looking at information chapters. Chapters that will lend information to you on things that you're going to be studying. It'll add to and bolster up your study, and you'll be able to tell more and more about what the book of Revelation is all about. It also carries you all the way to the end of the tribulation period, like I said, and the protection of the the remnant of Israel when they're locked away with the 144,000. It covers all of that in 6 verses, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful layout of what's going on. He even covers Satan's expulsion from heaven, and so when he's thrown down into the earth, and how then he gives you the keys of how to overcome him. So pay close attention. This most of us are being overcome, but we're not overcoming him. We're allowing him to walk on us and push us around, and that's just not the way God intended this thing to happen. He wanted the believers to walk by faith and not by sight, not by what the circumstances might dictate, but what do you really want out of this thing? What do you want to believe it, or you want to just let it pass on by? Keep in mind again, I can't reiterate this enough. Keep in mind that these are information chapters, and they are not necessarily part of the chronology, even though they are portions of each and every chapter of these information chapters, rather, that do plug in things into the chronology, and at some point you'll be able to go back and just drop everything in where it belongs if you continue to study. That's one of those things that you got to do yourself. Nobody can do it for you. You got to do it your own self. There's a lot of people that teach that the book of the Revelation is really don't have any chronology. It doesn't have any chronological order at all. But they're wrong. It does. It's very plain. You can almost like I said, drop things in right where they belong. So that's why it's so vitally important for you to continue to study. Watch out what you study. Watch out who you're listening to. Don't listen to a bunch of this stuff where people carrying you off with the deep end, because you can go in the book for yourself, and God gave you the same ability to study and to read as He did me or anybody else. We've all got the same ability within us. That's reading people are trying to teach us now that this book is not in chronological order, but it absolutely is. But you got to break it up in the right chapters and plug in the right things as you go along. The author, and always keep in mind, God is He is the author of order. He always keeps things in order. He don't ever let things get behind or get out of kilter. God is the author of order. Satan is the author of confusion. He'll confuse you, he'll twist you, he'll turn you, he'll do anything he can to keep you from understanding this book. He don't want you in this book. He don't want you to understand this book, because he knows when you ever get a hold of what's here, then he's had it. If the whole Christian community at one time got a hold of the book of the Revelation like Jesus intended us to, the devil is defeated. Of course, he's a defeated foe already. Jesus whipped him, but he's running over the church badly today. All right, now we're beginning reading at verse 1, and I want you to pay very, very close attention as we go down through here. Verse 1, chapter 12 of the book of the Revelation. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and up on her head a crown of 12 stars. There can't be any doubt now as to who this is, who this woman is being referred to here. It's the nation of Israel. The identity is very plain. She's had 12 stars, a crown of 12 stars. That's 12 kings of Israel. It's called kings, for lack of a better word. There should be no doubt about who that is now. Verse 2, and she, the nation of Israel, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and panted to be delivered. This can only be Israel preparing to give birth to Jesus Christ. Preparing to give birth to this Christ child, right in the middle of some of the greatest persecution that the Christian community ever was to suffer. Not only by the Roman government, but by the Jewish leaders of that day. They're getting ready right now to, they're expecting this Messiah to come, but of course you know how the nation of Israel really expected him to come. He's supposed to come in riding on a white horse and defeat the Roman government and run them all out and all this kind of stuff. But that's just not the way God laid it out to happen, and it didn't happen that way. Even though a lot of people try to teach that that the Roman government died itself, if you do enough study, you'll find out that Jesus is the one who crushed the Roman government into pieces, into such fine pieces that a mighty wind come along and blow it all away, and it did. She rided with the end, of course, but Jesus ultimately defeated her. Like I said, this birth is about to take place right in the middle of some of the greatest persecutions that there ever has been. It'd be impossible to understand the rest of the book of the Revelation if you did not ascribe this woman and the child as the nation of Israel and Jesus Christ. Just no way, because Israel gave birth to Jesus Christ. He came through that bloodline with one exception. He had no earthly father. No earthly father whatsoever. He had an earthly daddy, that was Joseph, of course, but he had no earthly father. You know who the father was. If you do just a little bit of study, there's no trouble finding out that the Holy Spirit came and overshadowed Mary, and she conceived a child by the Holy Spirit, which of course is God. Verse 3, and there appeared another wonder in heaven. Another wonder in heaven now. And behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads. Now listen, this is going to be very important when we get down and deeper into it, especially in the 17th chapter. Of course, we'll look at it again in the 12th chapter and the 13th chapter, and as we continue to study. A great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. That is very important to understand what that is. This is surely not a literal dragon. If anybody tells you this is a literal dragon, they're really off the deep end. This represents 7 kingdoms or 7 empires with 7 kings, all under the control of the dragon. Satan, we're going to visit this again a little bit later. These 10 heads, or these 10 crowns, will also play a very important part, especially in the 17th chapter of the book of the Revelation. Verse 4, and his tail, this great red dragon, his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. This tells about Satan being thrown out of heaven, and he carried with him a third part of the angels. Ever how many that is, I don't know. You don't either. Nobody else knows. But a third part of the angels was thrown out of heaven with him. And then you can read that whole story in the book of Revelation. And we're going to read down here where Jesus actually saw this happen. He drew a third part of the angels, or the stars, of heaven, and did cast them into the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Keep in mind, the word star, and I'd say almost most cases, means angels. We'll run across verses that will make this clearer and clearer as we go down through it, but one of the main verses is, we just got through with chapter 9. If you go back to chapter 9, verse 1, it's very plain to see. And a fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven into the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Now, we studied that back in chapter 9, at verse 1. Very plain to see, this star is an angel. Never forget, Satan, as well as God, uses people of this earth to do their work. This is why I say the dragon is 7, and these 7 heads and 10 horns represent 7 empires, 10 kings, that, like I say, that we look at all the way down through history. Every kingdom, every empire that ever existed fought against the nation of Israel, fought against God, fought against Jesus, all the way down through, especially in the Roman Empire and the Medo-Persian Empire and all the empires before. John makes it very plain in chapter 17 that 5 of them had fallen, and one of them was still in existence at that time, of course, which is the Roman government, and the 6th one, the 7th one was yet to come. And out of that 7th is going to come an 8th, which is the Antichrist. We'll go back to say, like in chapter 13, we'll touch that again, and then when we get back to 17, we done been through 17 chapters just once. We'll go back through it again. We're going to really be able to see what we're talking about. God has control of all of heaven's angels and can control the demonic angels if he wishes. He uses these demonic angels, and in a lot of cases he'll use them during the tribulation period. We'll see that very, very clearly. It's simple to read the birth of Jesus Christ, but one must go back and study Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all together to get a good, clear picture of Jesus and his birth. Everybody knows about the birth of Jesus. We do it every Christmas. It seems like to me every Christmas they bring up the same thing all the time, and which they should. I love that story. It's a story that I believe, a story I know is true. It's simple to read the story of the birth of Jesus and see how Satan used evil. He used evil. The Roman and Jewish leaders of that day to try to destroy him as soon as he was born. Even going to the point of killing all the babies 2 years old and under. Killed all of those babies, all those boy babies, under 2 years old. But still, he was not successful. Now keep in mind, and I want to say something here you probably, a lot of you ain't never heard before. Jesus was 2 years old when all this happened. The three kings were not there the night that Jesus was born. That sounds strange, doesn't it? Brother Baker, I think you're off the deep end. No, they were not there the night he was born. If you read Matthew chapter 2 and Mark chapter 2, you'll plainly see that when they ascertained from the wise men where Jesus would be born and what time he'd be born, he went and killed all these babies 2 years old and under. At this point, when the wise men finally found Jesus, he was in a house and he was called a young child, not a babe. Not a babe in the manger anymore. He was a young child, 2 years old, at least 2 years old. That's the reason they killed all the babies 2 years old and under. It's plain to see by reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You can see the bloodline of Jesus and his birth and his persecution. Chapter 27 lays out what would seem to be his murder. But don't ever, ever, ever let anyone tell you that Jesus' death was a murder. It was not a murder, though God used men as instruments to get his will done. This was not a murder. If it was a murder, then everything's in vain. Everything's in vain. They could not have killed him until they were given permission to do so. He walked through many, many crowds, walked right by people that could put him to death immediately. It never happened. Why? Because it wasn't time. It seems to be a murder, but it's not. Because it was a sacrifice. He laid down his life for you and I, not just for our sins, but he laid down his life so that you and I could be free from the onslaught of the devil, from the things that the devil was doing at that particular point. That's what happened. He sacrificed himself, set us free. Especially when he rose up from the dead, he defeated hell and death right then. Right then, hell and death were defeated. Death will have no more control over you and I. Brother Baker, everybody dies. Well, sure they're going to die. Sure they're going to die. But death can't just take you anytime it wants to. There's a time you're going to pass on this earth. Who knows what time that is? Yes, you can speed it up, you can slow it down. You can just go ahead and shoot you up a bunch of heroin and see if you can speed it up a little bit, because that's exactly what you're doing. Every time you do that, every time you smoke a cigarette, you're speeding it up a little bit. Every time you drink a bottle of whiskey, you're speeding it up a little bit. Now we're down to verse 5. And she, Israel, brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. That means firm authority. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. No doubt who that is. Israel gave birth to Jesus, and eventually, 3.5 years into his ministry, he was called up to God to take his place at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. It can't carry but one meaning. If you tried to put any other kind of meaning on that, then you're just spinning your wheels. Because there is no other meaning. It can't be. If you don't understand that, you'll never understand the rest of the book, especially chapter 12. Others have tried to say this is a special part of the church, and some people tried to say, well, it's 144,000. No, it just don't fit the train. That car don't fit this train. Of course, there's much left out of this chapter about the birth, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's why it's got so important. Like I say, and I'll harp on that to the day I die. You need to just do your study on your own to make sure that you know what you're talking about. Please go in there and study out the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, where you can really understand it. And the only place you're going to find that is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then, of course, there's tidbits all the way through on the book of Acts and 1st and 2nd Timothy, and a lot of the other books of 1st John. There's a lot of other books that give other things that can be plugged into the life, the birth, the life, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus never ruled on this earth, so he came to rule with firm authority. But he will. He will, during that 1,000-year tribulation period, he's going to rule with firm authority. That don't mean he's going to be a tyrant. That means he's going to just tell it like it is, like it or lump it. That's the way it's going to be. Firm authority. Just like your boss sometime at where you work. He says, this is the way it is now. If mistakes are made and he's laid this out for you to do it this way, then whose fault is it? It's his. It's his fault. If Jesus lays out something for you to follow, you follow it that way, and it fails, it's his fault. And he knows that's what firm authority means. Firm authority, absolute authority. Even though he may, Jesus is not going to be wrong, but even though your boss may be doing it backwards from where he should be doing, you've got to follow that. Unless, of course, it's going to hurt somebody, then you have to back up. So wait a minute, that's not going to work. All right? He's going to rule with this firm authority at the beginning and all the way through the millennium, and all the way forever and forever and forever. And who's going to be ruling with him? The church of Jesus Christ. He will rule with the rod of iron or firm authority. Revelation chapter 19, 15. Very plain.
When you're down and out, things just don't work out, and it seems that your life is at an end.